I was wiping down the kitchen counter when I found the receipt, and I swear my stomach dropped before I even finished reading it, because the date on it was from a night my wife told me she was at her mother's house. At first, I tried to brush it off, but then I saw the total: 2 full meals, expensive ones, and a bottle of wine we had never even come close to ordering together. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't confused. I was already trying to ignore something I knew was true. So here's the situation, and yeah, I need advice, because I honestly don't trust my own judgment anymore. I've been married to Erica for 8 years, together for 11, and up until recently I would have told anyone that we were solid. Not perfect, but stable in that quiet, predictable way where you think you've already survived the worst parts. We had routines, inside jokes, shared bills, shared plans, all the boring things that are supposed to mean something real. But over the last couple months, something shifted, and I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that I was just stressed from work or reading into things too much. She started pulling away in these small ways that didn't seem like much at first, like turning her phone face down every time I walked into the room, laughing at messages she wouldn't show me, suddenly caring about how she looked before running errands. And then there were the excuses, always these perfectly crafted, slightly irritated explanations like I was the problem for even asking. And Erica, she doesn't just lie, she makes you feel stupid for noticing the lie, like you're the one creating drama out of nothing. The receipt came from a place I've never even heard her mention before, some upscale restaurant across town that we've never gone to together, dated on a night she told me she was at her mother's house. And I remember standing there in the kitchen holding it, trying to line up the timeline in my head, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, telling myself maybe she grabbed takeout, maybe she went with a friend, maybe there's a reasonable explanation because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to say out loud. But then I noticed the total: 2 meals, expensive ones, and a bottle of wine that cost more than anything we'd ever ordered together, and I felt this drop in my chest like something inside me already knew the truth before my brain caught up. And I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that paper like it might change if I gave it enough time. And that's when I realized something that honestly scared me more than the receipt itself. I wasn't shocked. I was bracing, like part of me had already been preparing for this, like I'd been living with the warning signs and just refusing to read them. I didn't confront her that night. I wish I had, but I didn't. I folded the receipt, put it back where I found it, and acted normal. Sat across from her at dinner while she smiled and talked about her long day. And I remember thinking how convincing she was, how easy it seemed for her to sit there and lie without even blinking. And the worst part, the part that still eats at me, is that I started questioning myself instead of her. That was the moment everything changed, even though nothing had been said yet, and I could already feel something slipping away that I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. I wish I could say the receipt was the worst of it, that it was the peak moment where everything made sense. But looking back now, that was just the first crack in something that had already been breaking for a long time, and what came after made that receipt feel almost innocent by comparison. The next morning I told myself I needed proof, not feelings, not assumptions, not that quiet dread sitting in my chest every time she picked up her phone and turned slightly away from me like she was shielding a secret. I've never been the kind of guy who checks phones or digs through private stuff. I always believed trust meant not needing to. But something inside me had shifted, and it wasn't pride anymore. It was survival. So I waited until she left for work, and I went to where she usually kept her old things, a drawer she barely touched anymore, and I don't even know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe something small that would calm me down. But instead, I found a second phone. And I just stood there holding it, staring at it like it didn't belong in my life, like it was something planted there by someone else, because there is no good reason for a second phone you've never told your husband about. I turned it on, and I swear my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it, and when the screen lit up, I didn't see a lock screen I didn't recognize. I saw her face, a photo I took of her years ago, one she said she didn't even like anymore. That's when it stopped being suspicion. That's when it became real. I opened the messages, and I'm not going to repeat everything because even thinking about it now makes something inside me twist. But it wasn't just flirting. It wasn't some emotional confusion. It was deliberate, planned, confident, like she had built an entire second life parallel to ours and never once hesitated. And here's the first twist that really broke me in a way I didn't expect. The name at the top of the messages wasn't a stranger. It was Ryan, my best friend. The guy who stood next to me at my wedding, the one who helped me move into our first apartment, the one who sat on my couch drinking beers with me while my wife cooked dinner in the next room, laughing with both of us like we were family. I remember actually saying his name out loud like it would somehow change what I was seeing, like if I said it enough times it would turn into someone else. But it didn't. And the messages, they weren't new. They went back almost a year. A year of jokes, plans, complaints about me, things she said I wouldn't understand, moments they shared behind my back while I was sitting right there in the same room thinking everything was normal. I found messages where she mocked me for being predictable, for trying too hard, for not being successful enough. Like everything I did for us was something she tolerated rather than appreciated. And then there were messages about meeting up. Not just once, not just occasionally, but regularly, carefully planned around my schedule like I was an obstacle instead of her husband. I don't know how long I sat there reading, but at some point I realized something worse than the betrayal itself. She wasn't afraid of getting caught. She was confident she wouldn't be. And that's when I started to feel something shift inside me, something colder, something sharper, because this wasn't just cheating. This was calculated. But even then, even after all that, I still didn't know the full truth. And somehow, it was about to get worse. I didn't confront her right away, and I know that probably sounds weak or stupid. But when you see something like that, when your entire reality shifts in the span of a few minutes, your brain doesn't go straight to action. It goes into this strange, quiet mode where everything feels distant, like you're watching someone else's life fall apart instead of your own. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, closed the drawer, and just sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, replaying every moment from the past year in my head. Every time Ryan came over, every time Erica laughed a little too hard at something he said, every time I felt like a third wheel in my own living room and told myself I was overthinking it. But here's where things started to twist in a way I didn't expect. I decided to call Ryan. Not to confront him, not yet, just to hear his voice, to see if I could detect something, anything, some shift in tone that would confirm what I already knew but still couldn't fully accept. And when he picked up, he sounded completely normal, relaxed, even friendly, asking me how I was, making some joke about grabbing drinks later that week, like nothing had changed, like he hadn't been sleeping with my wife behind my back for a year. So I played along. I told him, yeah, we should hang out, maybe Friday night, same place as always. And he agreed without hesitation. That should have made it easier, right? Should have made it clear that he was just a liar, just someone I needed to cut out of my life. But instead, it made everything feel more surreal, because I realized something in that moment that hit harder than the messages. He wasn't just betraying me. He was comfortable doing it. But then came the second twist, and this is where things really started to spiral. Later that afternoon, I got a call from my sister. Now, my sister doesn't call randomly, especially not during work hours, so I stepped outside to answer, already feeling that same uneasy pressure building in my chest again. And the first thing she said was, "Hey, I need to ask you something, and I don't know how to say this without sounding crazy." And I laughed because at that point, crazy felt like the baseline. But then she said something that made my stomach drop. She told me she'd seen Erica, not alone, not with Ryan, but with someone else, a different guy, at a cafe across town. And she said they didn't look like coworkers, they didn't look like friends, they looked involved, in a way that didn't leave much room for interpretation. At first I thought she had to be mistaken, because as messed up as everything already was, there's a limit, right? There has to be a line somewhere where it stops getting worse. But she was sure. She even described what Erica was wearing, something I had seen her leave the house in just a few days earlier, and she mentioned the guy. Someone older, well-dressed, confident, the kind of man who didn't look like he was sneaking around, the kind who looked like he didn't have to. And suddenly the messages with Ryan didn't feel like the whole story anymore. They felt like just one piece of something bigger. And I remember standing there, phone pressed to my ear, barely hearing the rest of what my sister was saying, because my mind was already racing ahead, connecting dots I didn't even want to connect. Because if Ryan wasn't the only one, then what I had found wasn't the truth. It was just the beginning of it. And I could feel it, deep down, that whatever I was about to uncover next was going to hurt even more than everything that came before. At this point, I should have confronted her. I know that. Any normal person probably would have. But nothing about this felt normal anymore. It felt like I was standing in the middle of something much bigger than I understood. And every time I thought I had the full picture, another piece showed up and made everything worse. So instead of confronting her, I started watching. Not in some obsessive, paranoid way, but quietly, carefully, like I was trying to understand who she really was now, because the woman I thought I married, she didn't line up with what I was seeing anymore. That night, she came home late again, smiling in that distant way she'd started doing recently, like she was carrying something inside her that had nothing to do with me, and she walked past me, barely acknowledging I was there, heading straight to the bedroom. And I remember stopping her just lightly, just enough to make her turn around, and asking her, "How is your mom?" And she didn't even hesitate. She rolled her eyes slightly and said, "Tiring, like always. I told you she's not doing well. Can we not do this tonight?" That tone, that dismissive, irritated tone, like I was inconveniencing her just by asking a simple question, it hit me harder than I expected. Because I already knew she wasn't there, but I let it go. Or at least I pretended to, because I wanted to see how far this would go. And then came the next twist, the one that honestly made me feel physically sick. A couple days later, Ryan texted me first. Not her, him. He asked if we were still on for Friday, like we planned, and I said yes, because at that point I needed to see him face to face. I needed to understand how someone could look me in the eyes while doing something like this behind my back. So Friday came, and we met at our usual bar, the same place we'd been going to for years, the same place where we'd celebrated birthdays, talked about life, complained about work, all of it. And he walked in like nothing was wrong, smiling, relaxed, greeting me like I was still his friend. We sat down, ordered drinks, and for a while, it was normal. Too normal. We talked about work, about random stuff, about nothing important, and I kept waiting for something to slip, some sign, some crack in whatever act he was putting on. But it didn't come. So I pushed. I brought up Erica. Casually. I said something like, "Yeah, things have been a little weird lately. She's been distant. I don't know what's going on with her." And I watched him carefully when I said it. And he leaned back, shook his head, and said something that I still hear in my head over and over again. He said, "Man, you're overthinking it. She's just stressed. You know how she gets. You should trust her more." And I swear to you, he said it so naturally, so convincingly, that if I hadn't already seen those messages, I might have believed him. That's what broke something in me. Not the cheating. Not even the betrayal. But the way he looked me in the eye and told me to trust her. Like I was the problem. Like I was the one failing in the relationship. But then, it got worse. Because right as we were sitting there mid-conversation, his phone buzzed on the table. And I didn't mean to look, but I did. And I saw her name, Erica, right there on his screen, and the message preview. Just a few words, but enough. "I miss you already." While I was sitting across from him, while he was drinking with me, while I was still trying to process everything, and he saw me see it. There was this moment, this brief, silent moment where everything just froze. And instead of panicking, Instead of trying to hide it, he just slowly turned his phone over, took a sip of his drink, and said, almost calmly, "You weren't supposed to find out like this." And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted until then. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't something that just happened. This was something they both chose, over and over again, and I was the only one who didn't know. But even then, even sitting there staring at him, feeling like my entire life had been flipped upside down, I still didn't know the worst part, and I was about to walk straight into it. I didn't make a scene at the bar, and that's something people keep asking me when I tell this story, like they expect some explosion, some dramatic moment where I flip the table or throw a punch. But the truth is, I just went quiet. There's this kind of silence that comes over you when something breaks so completely that your brain can't even process it in real time. And that's exactly where I was sitting, across from a man I had trusted for years, watching him casually sip his drink after admitting, in the most understated way possible, that he had been sleeping with my wife. I remember asking him, calmly, almost too calmly, "How long?" And he didn't hesitate. He just looked at me and said, "About a year, maybe a little more." Like he was talking about a subscription or a habit, not something that had been tearing apart my life behind my back. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he added, "It wasn't supposed to get serious." That sentence, it stuck with me, because it told me everything I needed to know about how little any of this meant to him, how disposable I was in whatever story they had created for themselves. I left after that, didn't finish my drink, didn't say goodbye, just stood up and walked out into the night, and I don't even remember the drive home, just flashes of streetlights and the feeling of my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight it hurt. But here's where everything shifted again, because when I got home, Erica wasn't there, and at first that didn't seem unusual. She'd been coming home late a lot recently, always with some excuse ready, always with that same irritated tone if I asked too many questions. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was everything that had just happened. Maybe it was the fact that I finally knew the truth about Ryan, but I couldn't shake this feeling that there was more, that I still didn't have the full picture. So I did something I hadn't done before. I checked her location. We shared it for years, one of those small things couples do without thinking about it, and I had never once used it to track her or question her. But that night, I opened it, and she wasn't at her mother's. She wasn't anywhere near our usual places. She was at a hotel, not just any hotel, but one of those expensive ones downtown, the kind we always said we'd stay at someday when we had the money, when life settled down, when things were better. And I just stared at the screen, watching that little dot sit there, unmoving, like it was daring me to do something about it. So I went. I don't even remember making the decision. I just remember being in the car again, heading toward that location, my heart pounding in a way that felt almost detached from the rest of me. When I got there, I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, trying to convince myself to leave, trying to hold on to whatever was left of my dignity, because I knew what I was about to see would change everything in a way I couldn't come back from. But I went inside anyway. And here's the twist I wasn't ready for. She wasn't with Ryan. I saw her in the lobby, laughing, leaning into someone older, well-dressed, confident, exactly like my sister had described. And the way she looked at him, it wasn't casual, it wasn't temporary. It wasn't anything like what I had seen in those messages. This was different. This was intentional. And I stood there, frozen, watching my wife with another man, realizing in real time that Ryan wasn't the only one. He wasn't even the main one. He was just part of it. And in that moment, something inside me finally snapped into clarity. This wasn't an affair. This was a pattern. But even then, even standing there, watching everything I thought I knew collapse in front of me, I still hadn't uncovered the worst part, because the man she was with was someone I actually recognized, and that realization hit me like a second wave I wasn't prepared for. I wish I could say I was mistaken when I recognized him, That my brain was just trying to make connections that weren't really there. But no. The second I saw his face clearly, standing there with his hand resting on my wife's lower back like he belonged there, I knew exactly who he was. His name is Daniel, my boss. The same guy who had been mentoring me for the past 3 years, the one who pushed for my last promotion, the one who sat across from me in meetings talking about growth and loyalty. Like those words actually meant something. And there I was, standing in the corner of that hotel lobby, watching the two of them laugh together like they were completely untouchable, like the world outside that moment didn't exist. I don't even remember walking toward them. I just remember suddenly being close enough to hear her voice, that same tone she used with me when things were good, warm and engaged and real. Except now it wasn't mine anymore. She saw me first. And I swear to you, there was no guilt, no shock, just irritation, like I had shown up at the wrong time and inconvenienced her. And she pulled away from him slightly, turned to me and said, "What are you doing here?" Not, "Why are you here?" Not, "We need to talk." Just that, like I was the one crossing a line. And I remember looking at her, really looking at her, trying to find something familiar in her face, something that connected back to the person I thought I married, and I couldn't. So I looked at him instead. And Daniel didn't even try to hide it. He straightened up, adjusted his jacket, and said, calm as anything, "I think we should all handle this like adults." Like adults. Like this was some kind of business disagreement instead of my life collapsing in front of me. I asked her, "How long?" And for the first time that night she hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. And then she said, "It's complicated." That answer, it told me everything. Because when someone says it's complicated, it usually means the truth is worse than anything they're willing to admit. But then came the next twist, the one that made everything feel even more twisted than it already was. Daniel spoke again, and he said, "You should probably know. This didn't start the way you think it did." I remember feeling the strange calm settle over me, like I had already been through so much in such a short time that my brain just couldn't register shock the same way anymore. So I asked him, "Then how did it start?" And he looked at Erica, not at me, at her, like he was giving her a chance to say it first. But she didn't. She just crossed her arms and looked away, annoyed, distant, like she didn't want to deal with the consequences of something she had been fully involved in. So he said it. He said, "She approached me." And I swear, that hit harder than everything else. Because in my head, up until that moment, there was still this part of me trying to rationalize things, trying to believe she had been pulled into something, manipulated, pressured, something that made her a victim of bad choices instead of the one driving them. But no, according to him, she chose this. She initiated it. And suddenly everything clicked into place in a way that made me feel sick. The distance, the attitude, the way she looked at me like I wasn't enough. It wasn't confusion. It was comparison. But then, just when I thought I had finally reached the bottom of it, it got worse. Because Daniel looked at me again, this time more serious, and said something that completely reframed everything I thought I understood. He said, "You might want to ask yourself why she felt like she had to look elsewhere in the first place." And Erica didn't correct him. She didn't defend me. She just stood there, silent. And that silence said more than anything else. Because in that moment, I realized something I wasn't ready to accept. This wasn't just about what she did. This was about how she saw me, and whatever she saw, it wasn't enough. But even then, even standing there, feeling like I had been replaced in every possible way, I still didn't know the final piece. The one that would make everything else feel like just the setup. And I didn't realize it yet. But I was about to lose more than just my marriage. I don't think I've ever felt that kind of silence before. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind you get after an argument or a long day. But something heavier. Something that sits on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Because in that moment, standing in that hotel lobby, I realized I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing the version of my life I thought was real, and I should have walked away right then. I should have turned around, left them there, and never looked back. But I didn't, because I needed answers, and maybe that was my mistake. Maybe some things are better left unknown, because what came next, it didn't just hurt, it rewrote everything. I looked at her again, really looked this time, and I asked her, "Is there anything else you want to tell me?" And for a second, just a second, I thought I saw something crack in her expression, something human, something close to guilt. But it disappeared so fast I don't even know if it was real. She sighed, like this whole thing was exhausting for her, like I was dragging out something she had already moved on from. And then she said something that made my stomach drop in a way I didn't think was possible anymore. She said, "You were never supposed to find out like this." That sentence, it didn't sound like regret. It sounded like inconvenience. So I asked her, "Find out what?" And that's when the final twist started to unfold. Not all at once, not in some dramatic reveal, but slowly, piece by piece, like she was peeling back something she had been hiding for a long time. She told me that Ryan wasn't just some accident. He wasn't just a mistake that went too far. He was practice. That's the word she used. Practice for something better. And I remember actually stepping back, like the ground under me wasn't stable anymore, because I couldn't understand what she meant. Not fully, not yet. But then she kept going. She said she had been unhappy for years, that she felt stuck, that she felt like she had outgrown me. And instead of leaving, instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix anything, she decided to test what else was out there. Ryan was the first. Easy, safe, close, someone she could control. And when that didn't feel like enough anymore, she moved on to Daniel. More power, more status, more money. And as she said it, she didn't look ashamed. She looked justified, like she had been upgrading her life step by step, and I was just the starting point she had outgrown. But then came the part that completely shattered whatever was left of me. Because I asked her quietly, "So what was I to you this whole time?" And she didn't hesitate. She said, "Stability. Not love, not partnership, not family. Stability. A place to come back to. A life that kept things safe while she explored something else." And I swear to you, that word hurt more than anything else she said that night. Because it meant everything we had built together. Every memory, every plan, every promise was just a foundation for her to stand on while she looked for something better. And then Daniel added something that, looking back, I wish he hadn't said. But I'm also glad he did, because it forced me to see everything clearly. He said, "You should check your accounts." And I frowned, because at that point, I didn't even understand what he meant. But the way he said it wasn't a threat. It wasn't even cruel. It was almost matter of fact, like he was pointing out something obvious that I hadn't noticed yet. And Erica, she didn't react. She didn't deny it. She just looked away again. And that's when I felt it. That same cold realization creeping in. Because if there was one thing I had learned over the past few hours, it was that every time I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. And in that moment, standing there, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever I was about to find next was going to take everything she hadn't already destroyed. And I wasn't ready for that. But it was already too late. I drove home in silence after that, and I don't remember much of the road. Just the feeling that something inside me had gone completely still, like the part of me that reacts, that feels, that fights, had just shut down. Because at some point, there's only so much a person can process before it all just becomes noise. But his words kept replaying in my head. "You should check your accounts." Over and over. So when I got home, I didn't sit down. I didn't think. I went straight to my laptop like I already knew what I was going to find. Like some part of me had already accepted that there was one more layer to this that I hadn't uncovered yet. And I logged in. At first, everything looked normal. Balances were there. Transactions seemed routine, and for a second, just a second, I thought maybe this was the one thing that wasn't broken. But then I started scrolling, further back, and that's when I saw it. Small transfers, at first barely noticeable. A few hundred here, a few hundred there, always spaced out, always subtle. The kind of thing you'd never question unless you were looking for it. And I kept going. Months, then years, and the numbers started adding up in a way that made my chest tighten. Because this wasn't random, this wasn't impulsive, this was systematic, careful, planned. And the account they were going to wasn't hers. It was under a name I didn't recognize at first. But then it clicked. Daniel. Not directly, of course, but a shell account. Something tied back to him in a way that wasn't obvious unless you knew where to look. And suddenly everything made sense in the worst possible way. This wasn't just about relationships. This wasn't just about her finding something better. This had been building for years. While I was working, while I was trusting her, while I was believing we were building something together. She was slowly pulling pieces of it away. And I sat there, staring at the screen, realizing that I hadn't just lost my wife. I had been used, financially, emotionally, completely. And the final twist, the one that reframed everything, wasn't even something she told me. It was something I realized on my own. All those moments where she called me stable, all those times she said she felt safe with me, that wasn't love. That was strategy. I wasn't her partner. I was her foundation, the thing she stood on while she built a different life behind my back. And when she was ready, she was going to leave, with everything already in place. I don't remember how long I sat there, but eventually, something shifted again. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. Because for the first time since this started, I wasn't confused anymore. I knew exactly what this was, and I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. Not to talk things out, not to see what our options were, but to end it. Completely. And here's the part I didn't expect. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel justice. I felt empty. Like something had been carved out of me and there was nothing left to replace it. But at the same time, there was something else. Something quieter, something steady, self-respect. Because for the first time in all of this, I chose myself. And if anyone reading this is going through something similar, here's what I'll say. Don't ignore the small signs. Don't let someone make you feel crazy for noticing inconsistencies. And most importantly, don't stay where you are only valued for what you provide, not who you are. Because I stayed too long, I trusted too blindly, and it cost me everything. But walking away, that's the only thing that gave me anything back.